Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have people joining from different parts of the country, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Stephen Gilchrist. I'm Yamaji from the Ingada Language Group of Northwest Western Australia. I'm also Deputy Director of the Power Institute and Lecturer of Indigenous Art here at the University of Sydney. And on behalf of the Power Institute, I'd really like to welcome you all to this second discussion of our new series called Indigenous Ways of Being. And we've got a great lineup today. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on Gadigal land, and I'm, this is the land that the Power Institute stands. And this place was named by the Gadigal, for the Gadigal, and because of the Gadigal. And I pay my deep respect to the ancestors of the past, present, and future, who have been keepers and couriers of this knowledge. And so I share a deep commitment to making visible and audible and tangible the Indigenous knowledge embedded in and safeguarded through people and place. So today's event is a conversation, a roundtable discussion, which is really trying to amplify the rich Indigenous systems of knowledge that persist in country and in people and in our communities. It really is a way of trying to highlight the plurality of Indigenous ways of being in the place now termed Australia, as well as many shared points of commonality. So we have two more great conversations lined up for the year. So please, register for these events that will take place later. So this series was really motivated by asking the question, how can we make visible Indigenous forms of sovereignty, knowledge production in real and meaningful ways? Part of the thinking behind this series is to create these moments of togetherness without conflating it into sameness. And of course, there are multiple and multiplying ways of being Indigenous, and we're interested in the privileges and challenges of asserting cultural value in all its complexities and all its specificities. So, we need these opportunities to gather, to restore, to respirit our lands, our art, our communities, ourselves, and to begin to, not begin, but to tell our stories in our own ways for and with each other. We need to write these stories that have been told, rewrite the stories that have been told about us, and author new stories that create these new futures, new connections, new possibilities. And so I was really interested in how to create not just localized art and cultural histories, but the ways in which they are rewritten, the ways that they are resurfaced and being remade, how old methodologies are being devised and renewed. So we're witnessing this great transformation of the kind of discipline of art history, transforming archive from sometimes transforming archives into something that is embodied. So we're going to be hearing about some of these great projects today from our four panelists. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Brenda Croft, who's Professor of Indigenous Art History and Curatorship at the Australian National University and the Gough Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser Chair of Australian Studies, Harvard University 23-24. I've known Brenda for a really long time. It's been a very important mentor to me over many years. I've learned so much from you as how to be a curator and academic. I started as Brenda's intern at the Art Gallery West Australia many years ago, and we invited her to take part in this panel and to invite the other panels. So thank you so much for joining us, Brenda, and I'll let you introduce your other panelists today. So thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Josie Crawshaw. Thank you, Leah Leaman and Felicity Meakins.
Huge thanks, Stephen, and huge thanks to everybody who has persevered with bringing this panel together today. It has been a labour of blood, sweat and tears. And I'd like to particularly thank Penny Smith, the Art Centre Manager at Karankarni, who's literally on hitting the road to drive from Gurindji up to Darwin to be at the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair representing Karankaani Art and Culture Centre. As Stephen, who is a really dear colleague and friend, did with the start, I will also pay my deep respects to the custodians on whose land I am sitting today with my dear cousin sister Josie Crawshaw Nungari, the land of the Larrakia. I pay my respects to the ancestors, to the custodians and elders now, and those to come in the future. I do that as a Gurindji Malian Mutpura woman on my father's side. And I'm normally based on Nyambri Ngunnawal country in Canberra, but arrived up here on Saturday. We have a number of amazing speakers today, and we have had technical glitches. I've got to pull up everybody's bios, even though I know you all. I want to do you justice, so I will go to those in a second. The order of speakers will be, I'll introduce everybody, but we'll go with our esteemed elder, Josie Crawshaw Nungari, who I wouldn't really be here doing any of this without the love and support of Josie and her family, going back decades to both of our parents who are no longer with us, your mum and my dad. We'll then go to my wonderful niece, Leah Leaman, who has very generously struggled through getting onto the line here from Karankaani. And then we will go to a dear colleague and friend, Dr. Felicity Meakins, who is coming to us from Brisbane, the land of the Jagara, and you'll tell me the other traditional custodians because it's just slipped my mind. And then I will finish up. We've got a series of slides that we will go through. It's going to be a little bit free form. There might be a bit of umming and ahhing, as you can hear from me at the moment, but you know, we're human beings and we're bringing a diversity of Gurindji ways of being to you all through this talk today. Okay, so you can see from the map of Australia there that the area that we're talking about is towards the northwestern part of what is known as the Northern Territory. The borders, state and territory borders, are really kind of arbitrary in terms of First Nations landscape and boundaries. Depending on how fast you drive, it's an 8-hour drive from Darwin going southwest through Katherine and then heading west. Josie probably does it a lot faster than I do. She's 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours. It's an amazing landscape. I miss it. I haven't been there for 6 years and I'm really looking forward to going there in September. Family for us down there is extensive. Joyce, can I ask you to please introduce yourself, and the points that we've got to talk about are your mum's story, an encapsulation of your mum's story, what it means to you as a Gurindji woman, part of a displaced community through what happened to your mum growing up here in the Territory, and hopefully we can also get to touch on your extensive activism, but particularly your role in the fight to get the Don Dale Centre closed here at present.
Thanks, Brenda. Yes, first of all, I'd like to pay my respects to the Larrakia people of Darwin and the outer regions of Darwin, from the country that we are speaking from. It's also the country that I was born on. And but I am a proud, sovereign Gurindji Malian woman. My mother was born, her name was Daisy Cusack. My mother was born on a station called Imbunya Station, a cattle station. It's not quite clear how many years ago, but around 1915, but there isn't a birth certificate. And she was born to an Aboriginal mother. My grandmother was Demay, and a white Irishman called Jack Cusack, who was the station hand at Limbunya Station. My mother has a full brother to that particular union, but also has two brothers as well, where they all share the same mother. Mum, unfortunately, like many Aboriginal people here, was born in that era where they had the assimilation policy and the assimilation and segregation policy. So while she had her three brothers and a sister, Mum was removed up to Darwin, we think around 1921-22, to Carlin Compound. And that was an institute for what they called half-caste children. Mum never got to we think she was around 6 to 7 years of age. She never ever saw her mother or father again. And she was in that institution way up till she was about 23. Mum had definitely the Gurindji fighting spirit of being very, very sovereign and knowing that she was to be treated as a human being. And I'll read a little letter that she wrote to just give you some insight as to what this was like. This was in 1938. She wrote this letter to the NT Administrator of the Northern Territory. Dear Sir, I, the undersigned, do hereby make complaint that I have citizens' rights. I am 23 years of age, have been in medical service for 7 years, but am subject to being locked up in the girls' home. I wholeheartedly resent this treatment as I'm engaged to be married and I am quite responsible for my actions. Trusting you will do something for me, I am your obedient servant, Miss Daisy Cusack. So you can actually see the language of that time. And as she said, you know, you had to know your place, and she would have been punished if she didn't write in that way as being an obedient servant. Mum bought her house, which was a young woman. They gave 5 Aboriginal home trusts, and she was the only woman that bought one. However, when she married my father, Joe Ruddock, in those days, which was in 1941, she lost her rights to that house, and the house then belongs to the husband, which was the era and the rules of the day. This first slide that I've got up here shows my mum in the middle with the dark glasses, with her older brother, Uncle Spider, on the left, and her younger brother on the right. Now, she meets them around the 1980s. She's possibly 60 years of age, and this is the first time she's returned to Gurindji country. And the little girl in the red top and the one in the little white top, they are my 2 daughters. So she took them out, and my sister must be taking the photograph. So this is our first connection with our family. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Stephen. This is some years later, about 95, 96, and those 2 young girls that were in the photograph on the left and the one holding the baby, they're my 2 daughters again, and my two sisters' daughters, Nicole and Chelsea, and they're with Uncle Peter there. And again, sort of mid-1990s. So we're starting to actually build all our relationships and being able to come home to country. Next one. This is a time when Mum's been out there. Again, I'm not quite sure of the exact year, but she's part of the women's ceremony and Mum, at every chance that she got, would go there. She was sort of still working right up till she was 75, and it was very hard to get out there because, as we said, it's about 780 k's southwest, very expensive. But she did do that. Next one up to that. This is on the road going out to Limbunya, to where she was actually born. And Uncle Peter and Auntie Frances is on the side. We are all there. We're all in the cars waiting, and we go out, and the station owner gave us permission to come on, and Uncle Peter took Mum to where she was actually born. Next one. This is at Limbunya at the waterhole there, and that's our snake dreaming story here. And there are many of us in the background right up on the rock face, and Uncle's actually going through and giving us our Aboriginal names, and that's him and Mum together there. Next one. This is I think at the same time that we were out there, and this is all of our families. This is Uncle Peter's 2 wives, daughter-in-laws, Mum with her 3 daughters. That's me bending over. I did have black hair at one stage. And then the rest of my children and my sister's children. Not the boys weren't out there at that stage. Next one. This one is at the 30th Freedom Festival, 1996. Once Mum had made that first trip out, all Gurindji mob that were removed and were living in Darwin, and people were trying to find their relations. Mum, over the years, kept taking people out, and as Brenda was saying, that's how Mum took Brenda out for the first time to country. And Brenda is in this particular photo right over in the far right in the middle with her red hair at that stage. So there's about 5 different families there that have come home and have meeting their relations. And Mum was a big influence and made all those connections. Next one. This is in Sydney in 2017 at Brenda's Still in My Mind forum and her piece of work. And these are my grandchildren now at the back. There's 4 of them at the back on the far left and the little one in the front and the right. And these are, this is my auntie holding the baby that's married to Uncle Peter. And that's her sister, my other auntie next to her, Sarah. And other family members and grandkids of the other Gurindji mob that were in Sydney.
That's Keena's kids.
Okay.
Keena lives down there, yeah.
Okay. Next one. As we said, that if anyone knows about the Gurindji walk-off, we are huge fighters for our sovereign rights, and it's been one of the longest, if not longest, strike in this country of 9 years. And I'm proud to say that it's in our genes, and these are my grandchildren walking at the Black Lives Matter forum here in 2020. Keep going. Finally, my mother gets recognition as a native title owner, and we ourselves get our native title lease to Limbunya Station, pastoral lease. And this is our immediate family, Uncle Peter's grandchildren, because Uncle Peter's now died. And Uncle Peter had 2 boys, and sadly, they have both died at 14 and 41. And so this is my sister's children and and grandchildren, and myself and my other sister with my grandchildren, my great nieces. Thank you. Next one. As we said, we been going since Mum started that connection. We tried every time to go out, and this is my children, my two daughters, with some of my grandchildren and with Uncle Peter's grandchildren going out for the funeral of my cousin brother, who only died, it'll be 3 years ago in October. And as I said, he was only 41. So we've had a really sad history in our family. Keep going. And now for myself, I've had a long history of activism, spending time in the United States looking at sovereignty and self-determination and treaties, as well as being an ATSIC commissioner, being the co-chair of the Uluru Statement, so a main leader and coordinator of those discussions. And our biggest fight at the moment is closing Don Dale. You may recall back in 2016, the Four Corners report that saw the cruel and humane treatment of our children here in youth detention in the Northern Territory in spit hoods and restraint chairs. There has been a Royal Commission since that time, and that's been 5 years since they've come down with their findings. With their first finding, main goal was to close Don Dale, which is a condemned adult prison. And to this day, it is still not closed. Those cruel and humane treatment of our kids is going on unabated. They are still using restraint chairs. They are locked in their cells for 23 hours a day. They are on remand. 100% on any given day are Aboriginal children. 80% are on remand. And when they do get bail, they are shackled with ankle bracelets, and they're as young as 10 years of age. And so our movement has been getting quite a bit of momentum, and we've had a major forum just in Darwin on the weekend, which I was a speaker at. And hopefully we've got the United Nations inspector on the UN Convention on Torture that will be coming to visit the Don Dale Centre in the next couple of weeks. They are breaking every United Nations convention, and we want to see this close. This would not happen anywhere else in Australia. If these were white children, it wouldn't happen in Darwin. But we know that this country has not really moved on, and we are seeing the genocide again. It is as big as the first 150 years of genocide and colonisation in this country, and it's with our children. Thank you very much, and hopefully you can read some of the links of the work that I've done. And I thank the organisers for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josie. I saw that there was some links put into the chat. There's an amazing interview with Josie by Professor Larissa Berendt for her program Speaking Out on ABC Radio, so you can listen to the broadcast of that. And there's a number of other links to the work that Josie's been doing. You can also check on the Power Publications site to get a bit more background of the incredible work that Josie's done in her long fight, her sovereign fight as a Gurindji woman, and that absolutely comes through you from your beautiful, beautiful mum.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll now go to Leah Leaman Ipangali Namacha, sorry, pardon me. Namacha, who's a Malian Gurindji artist, proud artist at Karankarni Arts Centre at Kalkaringi in the Northern Territory, which is where she's coming to today. She takes a pivotal role in many of the Arts Centre projects, including 2 recent culture, language, art, science projects we'll talk about today, Tamara, termites in their mounds, and the electromagnetic perception in Gurindji people project, which I'm fascinated to hear about, which she's been doing in collaboration with one of our other speakers, Professor Felicity Meakins from University of Queensland, and Professor Joe Kirschvink, and researchers from Caltech in Los Angeles, where they went recently. Leah was born in an old Darwin hospital in 71. Her mother's country is Jurumalin on Limbanya Station. It's from here that she gets her totem, the red-backed kingfisher. She's currently employed by the NT Government Department of Families, previously having worked for Catherine West Health Board as a receptionist at the Kalkaringi School and as a Gurindji ranger. She's served on many Indigenous boards, including the Kurrankani Art and Culture Centre, the Gurindji Aboriginal Corporation, Aboriginal Benefits Account. Her hobbies include fishing in the local rivers and waterholes and painting, and she's a magnificent artist. And she's also represented in the exhibition Still in My Mind, Gurindji Location, Experience and Visuality. Her paintings reveal her love of fresh water and fish, and she often uses them as subject matter, and she loves painting Brolga. Her paintings try to blend traditional stories in contemporary format and are highly sought after. As soon as she paints them, they are snapped up. Her work's featured in many exhibitions, including the annual exhibition at the Charles Darwin University ATSIC unit commemorating Vincent Lingiari Memorial Lecture from 2015 to 2018. And she's represented in the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair, which opens this week. Her artwork, Women Collecting Flowers and Bush Food, is still in my mind. Beautiful painting. Growing up in Middle Camp at Dagaragu, Leah learned to fish and work in the big community garden. And her husband, Daniel Palmer, is an Eastern Arrernte man, and they have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. So I'm going to hand over to Leah and welcome you here today, Leah, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Auntie Brenda, and thank you, Josie, for sharing your story. And keep up the good fight. And I would like to acknowledge our elders past and present here on this land, and all of Australia, because Australia is many nations, and I'd like to open up with that. We are many nations in one, and I would like to acknowledge, the many nations also, And thank you for that, Auntie. And I just would like to also share first, for me, what it means to be Gurindji is, it's many things. And for myself, I grew up bit different to you, Auntie Brenda, and Josie there, but also same because my dad's also white. He's Dutch, and my mom was full blood. And even right up to the 70s, they had also they faced the same obstacles, you might say, and hurdles right up until the 70s, up until the 80s, between this black and white relationship. So I think in the Northern Territory, especially in community, no one's been really left, no family really, to tell you the truth, has been left untouched by like removals and that, because we're only finding out now that most of the kids that are up in Darwin are Gurindji descent. Many, because of where we were located at the time, because we were stuck in the middle of pastoral country. And that's why, coming back to that, we really acknowledge that Faro Park, in Bagot Road there, that they named the child's park. Yeah. It's funny that, I'm glad they gave it that name, because although there was a lot of trauma and mainstream would never understand the trauma that has been in families, generations down. But like Josie said, we are survivors. Gurindji people, we are survivors. And that's what I found out, we always survive, we'll always find a way to move on. Always acknowledge the past but to move on, to look back. It's strength, like we have that strength, an inner strength, I find, as a people, no matter where people are, displaced in the cities, say in Darwin, say in Sydney, say in Melbourne, but we still have that bond knowing that we are Gurindji, of Gurindji descent. And proud, I have to say, Gurindji Malngin Mutpura, Gurindji Walbury now. Yeah, but we are a proud people, and in our plight, we've always had good people like Nangari Felicity, Penny, the unionists, the linguists that have gone now, like Jambin, even when I was only small, Pugaga, bless his soul, like, I know he's still alive, but I say that in just out of deepest respect. We've always had good people with us, on our side. And for me, I find like through the artwork, especially for myself, it is through my artwork and working with country, through this Damara project, with the ladies that we have here at the Art Center, and family, knowing that whose family, and our elders that are still here, passing that knowledge on, it helps me to be strong as a Gurindji Malngin woman, to see my family through and my people. As Honey Brenda said, only not long we did this Damara project, and the slide up there is with me holding a big termite mound, and I named it Megamind because we took the slides to the USA, to California with us. And the photo here is of the other grannies, like I was there part of that, cooking one of the babas up in Damara, actually. I say cook up as in like, yeah, we sort of like leather them. We don't literally cook the babas up, but we put them in like a sauna thing. It's a healing, termite is a healing tool for us. It's a really special, termite mounds are really special for us, part of everyday Gurindji living, yeah, and that's just one of the photos up there. But this one's about the Damara project. Damara means termite in English. Termite mound, actually. Mungut is termite. But these paintings, the slide that is up here now, it shows my artwork and of my interpretation of getting the story across for the Damara, for the importance of Damara in Gurindji life, the termite. And I know too, like I've come to understand, like a lot of our brothers and sisters, grannies, aunties that were taken from us have missed out on a lot of these things, like learning the knowledge of healing tools, of what certain things mean. They have missed out in many ways, but my heart is saddened for that part, because it was no doing of their own. And but I have that hope, like, they're most welcome to come back if they want to learn about anything, And I know it's really hard. It's so far down to here. It's the distance and the cost and everything. But we are here, we're here to share the knowledge with brothers and sisters that have been taken from us. We are still here. We still hold the knowledge. And our love for you is still here too, Josie, never forget that. We've always, all the grannies, they always speak of the ones that have been taken. Even my nana, she's still alive today, Auntie Brenda's auntie, Watla. She still remembers my uncle being taken from my lap. And that's my uncle Murray, Ryan. She still remembers the place every time we drive past, one of the, up the road here, about 21 Ks up. She remembers the exact spot. And I asked her, how do you cope with trauma such as that he was taken from your arms, snatched from your arms? And she says, knowing that he still came back to us and to identify with family. And that's something, that we hold on to strongly as Gurindji people. I'm sure as in all nations that had that happen to them. And this is part of the Damara project. the ladies doing the big art project for CDU. Because with this slide, it shows healing on country, you know, that's what it is. Doing these projects from the art center, it heals your mind, heals your spirit, you know, heals your soul. And I know we have Freedom Day coming up, you know, we always look forward to countrymen coming back, you know, family coming back, even if it's for weekend, you know, but even just to share that moment, you know, sit down, have a laugh, sit down and share and reflect and, yeah, just talk about things. It's always, we always look forward to that. This slide up here, it shows our team, the Tomato Project team. The one is, the other slide shows my grandmother, Violet Nanago Wadril, with Ngangari Felicity, going through the booklet. And this is the team that's doing the Tamara book, this slide up here. That's with Greg and Bryony, Ngangari Felicity, and the team. So it was a really whole team effort, that one. And it was a good working bee, you know, it's always good to have a good working bee thing. Yeah. And from me, yeah, that's all I would like to share, you know.
Leah, before we go on to Felicity, can you talk also a little bit about your work with Territory Families or Department of Families, and also your range of work? Is that okay?
Yeah. I've been with Territory Families for a long time. But my role is, it is called Remote Family Support Worker. Even though I am with Territory Families, that's just the name of it, the umbrella. My role is in the Women's Refuge, and that is to help the women and children and help families to connect, families that are struggling, and also to bring back children that have been taken from us, you know, that are living in care in Darwin and in Catherine, to identify families that are here and to bring them home now, to get them out of that care system. That's my role. That's why I've stayed in it that long. If it was a different role, I wouldn't have been in that job for as long as I am now. But that is my job. It is to identify families, to bring them home safely, to get them out of that care system that have been in there for a long time. And that's what Territory Families are trying to do now. Like, there's been a lot of changes, you know, I don't just say that just because I work for them, but there are good changes coming, and we bring that up with the hierarchy, you know, like, it's got to start working with community, Indigenous people, you know, we can't keep still having that removal of children, because it's not working. It's just costing too much, and it's not working for everybody.
Well, as Josie said, and the statistics that are shocking when people read them and take them in, the removal rates of our children are higher than ever. Yes. And the worst places are the Territory and the ACT. Yes. And the role of what Josie's doing in advocating for children in detention and for you trying to get our kids back, it's monumental. It's never ending.
Yeah, there's a direct link, and it is true all over the world that most prison populations come from a child protection background, and we've just had, the intervention has had just the most devastating effect, where massive removals happened, and it is bigger than ever in the history of the stolen generation. And they get lost, they're removed from country, removed from family, and they end up very much in youth detention, and then they just go on to being in the big house, into adult life. And so Leah and I have worked in this space together, in this safety space as well, in the child protection space. Thanks, Leah.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie.
And that's why the projects that you are doing through Gurindji and working with Felicity are so key to help try and balance out that reinforcement, that reinvestment, the maintenance, the cultural maintenance and transmission of culture for younger generations coming through is so key.
Because we've also got a women's program that the CFC have done here, and we work closely with them. That was with Sister there, Quotatia Thompson. She's got this really good program that's going where we take the young women back out to country. Like we take them on camps and that, but that's part of that healing, you know, and getting them reconnected and getting the younger kids to know where they fit in this changing world. You know, that's half of the problem because they've lost that reconnection with country, with language, with clan, with totem. So that's been really good, that one. So yeah, so we're trying to get that, like that's been a really successful one that we've got happening, you know. Yeah, that's just one part of that program. Yep.
Oh, thank you so much, Leah. I've also asked Nick to put a link up to the catalogue from the exhibition, which was still in my mind, the Gurindji Location, Experience and Visuality, because it has a link to Leah's work and an artist statement, and you can also see work of the other artists from Karankaani. That was a collaborative exhibition. And now it's with great pleasure I move to our next esteemed speaker, Dr. Felicity Meakins, who I call a dear friend and as well as a colleague, who will talk about her work with Gurindji community. And I'll just give a bit of background on Felicity. She's Professor of Linguistics at the University of Queensland and a Chief Investigator in the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language. She's a field linguist who specialises in the documentation of First Nations languages in Northern Australia and the effect of English on these languages. She's worked as a community linguist as well as an academic over the past 2 decades, facilitating language revitalisation programs, consulting on native title claims, and conducting research into First Nations languages. She has compiled a number of dictionaries and grammars and has written numerous papers on language change in Australia. Felicity has shown through her actions to me as a fellow academic researcher how to be an ethical researcher, how to work closely with First Nations communities, to be guided by those communities, to not try and have ownership over the cultural knowledge that is shared, but to be a facilitator to help bring that material together that can be used then by community first and foremost. And it's been a real pleasure and honour to be able to work with her closely on a number of the projects she's done through Karankaani Art and Culture Centre. And I also mentioned Penny here, who has worked really dedicatedly committed to advocating on behalf of Gurindji community and not for self-gain. And the both of you have shown the way that non-Indigenous people can work as great allies of First Nations peoples. So I'll hand over to Felicity now.
Thanks very much, Brenda. I'm zooming in from Yagara and Turrbal lands on the country that's now known as Brisbane. So I'm at University of Queensland. I'd like to pay my respects to all of those Yagara and Turrbal people, and also really to the Gurindji people who grew me up as a linguist, particularly to Brenda's auntie and Leah's grandmother, Violet Wadrell, who were a different time. She would be the professor of linguistics doing these projects, not me. So I'm going to pick up, I guess, on some of the threads that have been talked about, some of the really awful history that's happened on Gurindji country and how that's related now to the sort of work that Leah does with Child and Family Services and the advocacy and activism work that Auntie Josie's doing, which is just incredible. So I'll talk a little bit about a history project, which Brenda was also really key to. And this history project is just is one of the first books that came out where history was told in the first language of the place, so Gurindji language. So there are over 350 languages across the continent. And there are still places which language is still spoken. Gurindji country is one of those places. And there's also amazing language revitalisation that's going on right across the country at the moment, which is so heartening to see. There's a real renaissance going on. So the book, if we go to the next slide, is called Ejini, True Stories from Gurindji Country. On the front cover, you can see an old man who I'll refer to as Malagaye, out of respect for him. His name's also on the front cover. But you can see all of the elders who contributed stories to the books, and the stories were first-hand accounts of quite awful things that happened on Gurindji country. Also quite extraordinary things like the first landing, for instance, of the aeroplane, which was, something that was really, really different for people at that particular time. So it's eyewitness accounts, and it's also stories that have been passed down through the generations. So the process, if we go to the next slide, was to record these histories. These histories were recorded in the elders' first language. So previously there have been histories recorded of Gurindji country and surrounding areas, and there's been some fantastic work that's being done. But I think being able to tell your stories in your own language means that those stories are just rich of the details, phenomenal. When we were going back through the archives, particularly Brenda and I, and also Erica Troller, who was doing this work, we found photos that matched the stories, and you could just tell that everybody's memories were just so sharp. It was as if these stories had just happened, the day before. So we recorded histories. We went out on country to where particular events happened. We worked a lot in archives, so Brenda, Erica Troller, another linguist, and I. We also ran an artist camp. So this was through Karankaani, and we'll see some photos of this. And Brenda was really key to that camp too. Leah was one of the artists on the camp. So there's also the exhibition that Brenda curated, and also the book production, which you saw, which was the part that I had the sort of most to do with. So this particular image is from one of the Karankaani artists, Dylan Miller, who I guess pictorially shows the process of creating Gurindji history through visual arts and also storytelling. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of these histories were recorded by linguists, not just myself, but some of the previous linguists who've worked in this particular area. So this is a photo, for instance, of Blanche Bulngari, who has passed away, but a long time ago. So her family are happy for her name to be spoken now. And she worked in the 1970s with a linguist called Helen McNair, and told just gorgeous stories. And she would tell stories about her childhood. So there were stories told through a child's eyes. So for instance, the first station at Wave Hill was flooded in 1924, and she was just a little girl. So you can see there's a painting there from one of her granddaughters, Sarah Oscar, who's depicted her story. And we also went back into the archives, including the police book, and photos that were published in the paper. And she told the story as a child watching, for instance, cattle bobbing by and things that were extraordinary to a child. So it's, the stories that she told were really fascinating. So if we go to the next slide, there were other wonderful storytellers. So Pinchin Nyodamayadi, who worked with Patrick McConville, who's often called Bulgaga, another old man who's passed away recently, who worked a lot with Norm McNair, and Erica Troller, who did absolutely fantastic work with the old man who's sitting there, Malagaye, and those stories are just absolutely rich. So if we keep going through the next slide. So once these stories have been compiled, and they were compiled over the years, over quite a few decades actually, we then spent a lot of time with the community checking the stories for all the details. So the stories were played back in about 20 evening sessions where family came along and listened to the stories. gave us a little bit more detail about who was in the stories. Sometimes we couldn't quite tell who was being referred to, that sort of thing, and also took out elements that they thought were just for families to know about, not for the general public to know about, because the idea of the book, behind the book, was to make the stories of Gurindji country open so that people would know what happened on that country. There were massacres, murders at the hands of individual colonists. And as I said, there are also quite extraordinary things that happened, like the first aeroplane landing and the story of the Kookaburra, which was a plane that crash landed and is quite well known in aviation history in Australia. This happened on Gurindji country. So once that storytelling was done and the stories were translated into English and all the details were checked, we go on now to the next slide, where Erica Tirolo, Brenda and I did a lot of historical work in archives. So I'm giving this example. This is Leah's grandmother's husband, father. This is Brenda's auntie's father. So this is a photo that was taken as part of the Tyndale expedition, that was actually photographed by Birdsall on Convoy Station, which is close to Limbunya Station, Wave Hill Station, which Josie's been talking about. So these were photos that were taken in 1954 and have since been repatriated to families, and that's been one of the processes that happened during the creation of this history book. So that was one of the things that we did. If we go on to the next slide, we went on to Gurindji country. A lot of this was Wave Hill Station, Limbunya Station, which Josie's talked about, to think about those stories on country. So the elders who were still with us came out and told those stories on country. We're all supported by the Gurindji Ranger Group, who are an absolutely fabulous ranger group who do wonderful things on country. They bring together the Gurindji ideal of I guess, not siloing knowledge. So I think particularly in academia, we silo knowledge. We think about language, culture, country, these things as separate things. Organisations like Karankani Arts and the Ranger Group really bring all of these elements together and don't consider them to be separate, I guess, parts of knowledge. So we were on country hearing about these stories. This was a really important moment for younger generations to hear those stories and to become custodians of those stories themselves. Also part of the project, if we go to the next slide, we then ran an artist camp at Wadajgun. You can see Leah in this photo, also with Sarita Donald and Brenda, of course, and Violet Waddrell, who I've spoken about a lot during this talk. You can see Leah and others painting there, and then the stories associated with those paintings were also written down too. So if we go then to the next slide, I just wanted to show the beautiful picture that Brenda was referring to, Leah's gorgeous picture, which I'm not sure, maybe Leah, you could even jump in and talk about this painting if you're still...
Yeah. The painting that I did, I asked the grandmothers and the mothers, at the time of Kinbarak, how did you feel as a female and a woman in those hard times? Like, what did you do to escape all the hardships of that time? Because we have to remember, they weren't living in houses. They weren't having their babies in hospitals, and having pain relief and all that. They lived in bad conditions, just on like concrete a lot of the time, just on cement or just humpies, that were made out of cardboard boxes and scrap metals of sheets of iron and blankets, and no insulation, in 52-degree heat, 2 degrees in the cold, and pouring rain in the wet season, and waking up 5 a.m. to get milk, for the station managers or whatever to get fresh milk, and going to bed 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night from backbreaking work for no pay. those are some of the conditions they were living in, all the hardship. So I asked them, what did you do to remain strong as a woman and to escape all this thing that was going around in your mind, with your families, with yourself, to yet still remain strong? And a lot of the grandmothers came back to me and said, well, during the seasons, when it was time for us to go, we would go and pick like sugar bag, pick bush flowers that had honeysuckle in them, pick the bush medicine, the bush flowers, and make bush medicine for themselves, even little ointments in that for their sores because they were so far from hospital. And get manyanyi and malan and all that, for their flus and decongestions, and just to be around where the bush medicine was. That was their way of escaping all that, even if for a moment. And it strengthened them, doing all those things, working with healing things, properties, medicines, and all that. It gave them that extra strength, that they needed to come back and face another day of all that hardship again, and being harassed by the station workers too, being women just taken from their husbands, and the husband couldn't do anything, These things happen whether they liked it or not. So to escape all that brutality, hardship, degradation, humiliation that can happen to a woman, those are the things they did. They'd pick up the wildflowers, go and collect the bush medicine, go out into the country. And the painting, it represents the flowers that they pick, the ladies that are there, the young women, their paintings, and just being back in country, as away from that, all the hard work, all that horrible thing that was happening at the stations at the time. That's what the painting tells the story of the ladies and the grandmothers, the aunties, the nieces, the sisters. And yet, they're still here. Like my Nana's one of them. She's still here, still surviving, still going strong as a woman, and still trying to hold family together and still carry themselves with dignity. So that's what the painting depicts.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And of course, all of those really hard times led to the Gurindji walk-off. And I wonder if you might talk a bit about Serena's painting there that I think is of digging for water at Gordy Creek during the walk-off.
This other painting is one done by my auntie, and we actually grew up together. My mom actually grew up, so she's more like a sister to me, and we're the same age. Her painting, it tells a story. When they walked off, there was no water at the time, so the ladies, they went on the creek beds, dry creek beds, and started digging, with their digging stick to get clean water for the little ones from the soakages, and they found water and clean water, so they'd let it seep through. That's what the painting tells, and it tells of that rugged country, But the ladies are in the middle with their digging sticks, getting that clean water for everyone to drink, especially for the children, like to quench their thirst in their journey walking this way towards the river, because we have to remember they were walking through times from Gilchrist to here in fear, and like they just literally had to pack up with nothing and just move, just with maybe billy can, crowbar, or digging stick, and just maybe one little Hessian bag, that is used as a calico, and with their children. So that's the ladies. Her story tells the story of the ladies digging for water in the soakages to get clean water for the little ones, especially cold water from right under the ground.
Yeah. Thanks, Leah. I think that's the end of my slides there. Maybe if we go to the next one, I think it's the end of the slides. So those were some of the, I guess I probably sort of end with saying that as a linguist, when you work really closely for me, with Gurindji people, you end up doing an awful lot of things that you don't expect to be doing. And it's been an absolute privilege to work with you, Mob, with your families, to be privileged to hear these stories and to be able to make those stories then available so that other Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people in Australia can hear what happened on Gurindji country, because what happened, of course, also happened in many other places. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicity and Leah and Josie. The slides that are going around now, I've just asked Stephen to have them on a loop for me. We won't go to the Q&A just yet. We'll go for a bit longer. I wanted just to kind of reinforce the significance, the essentiality of family and community. For myself as a Gurindji, Malian, Mutbara, Chinese, Irish, Scots person on my dad's side, and English, German, Irish heritage on my mother's side. As you'll have heard with all of us speaking, our stories interconnect, and even though we have our own specific lived experiences, those connections are interwoven throughout our lives. And for myself, the journey that my father undertook as a very small child, when he and my grandmother Bessie, who are in the images that are going through now, were removed from their country at Victoria River Downs, another massive cattle station that had very strong connections to Wave Hill. My dad was born likely in 1925, and on country. The earliest records I found of him thus far are from the Timber Creek Police Letters Book in 1927, where on the 1st of July it was documented that he and my grandmother Bessie were taken by the police officer, Hemmings, his last name was, up to Carlin Compound, the what was called the half-caste home, and that was where Josie's mum had been taken to, and many people from Gurindji community over decades. And so if you think about that, you know, I'm in the very privileged position of looking after my great nephew, and I consider that a great privilege. There's been nearly a century of enforced removal in my own family alone, and I don't say that to say it's a special instance. It's just indicative of what our communities have had to deal with in the time since the first pastoralists came through Gurindji country in the late 1880s. And in fact, I drove up here from Canberra with my young nephew, who I call son, and we arrived on Saturday. But on the drive up, amazingly, we went through a place, can't even remember the name of the place now, on the New England Highway, and I saw a sign saying the grave of Nat Buchanan, historical site. And I thought, Nat Buchanan, I'm sure he was the first, he ran the first Wave Hill station in 1883. And so I followed this historic sign, heritage sign, and sure enough, there were all details there about this man who came from, I think he came from Scotland. He was known for his very, very fair skin. He would ride on a horse with an umbrella to keep the skin off his sun off his skin because he was so pale. And he was known also as Paraway, meaning he came from far away. And he had helped establish the very first Wave Hill station and had gone back down to northern New South Wales to live out his last days and was buried there. So I felt these weird signposts almost on the way coming up here. Stopped off to visit a dear friend of Gurindji community, Kev Carmody, who's an old mate of mine for many decades. He and his partner Beryl on the way up, and introduce Christopher to Kev because Christopher loves that song, From Little Things Big Things Grow. So you kind of, I guess one of the things I wanted to bring to this is, as a displaced Gurindji descendant, I've been fortunate enough to be able to come back to country and home and community from the early 1970s when my father came back and was reunited with my grandmother just before she passed away. For many people, that hasn't been a similar story. There have been those kind of broken connections, but you have to carry a sense of country within you. If you don't grow up on country, if you grow up away from language and cultural practices, and I'll be forever indebted to people like Leah, to Auntie Violet, to Wadrell, to all the elders who are no longer here. Your darling mother, who a tiny woman but huge stature, who I'll never forget the trip home to Gurindji the first time in 1991 with Auntie Daisy and with Sybil Fordham, who appears in one of those photographs. My dad was able to go out there in 1989, and there's those images always bring tears to my eyes of him sitting there with one of the senior women elders. He also did oral histories while he was out there, and I've been able to access those audio tapes and transcripts. And he's buried out there. We took his ashes home, and I couldn't have done that without the assistance of Josie in 1996 in August. And I loved seeing overlapping photographs of when we did take Dad's ashes home, and all the family who was out there. It meant everything to have them there when we laid him to rest at Gurindji Cemetery, the second cemetery, which if you look behind, you can actually see the geographical Wave Hill, the original Wave Hill, that is where the first station was placed in that image there. You see images of my dad with my brother Lindsay, who both of whom no longer with us. The opportunity to be able to travel back. My brother never got to go to country. All the work I do as an educator and a researcher, as an artist, are for my family members, for my other brother Timothy's children who've been taken out home. I mean, you'll see that was coming up again and again, the importance of taking younger family members out to country so that they get an understanding and a sense of who they are. I often feel surrounded by ghosts and spirits in a way. I had a very teary phone call with Josie the first night I got here, because I think it's overwhelming to come back. COVID has really impacted, the capacity to travel out to country, and I can't wait to go out there with Felicity in September. It's a great honour to be able to work on the next part of the Termite Dreaming project, the Tamara Dreaming project, and help use the skills I've got to do something for community. I pay tribute to my mum, who was so solid in making sure my dad was able to reconnect with family and community. We came up here in 74 and stayed with my nana at Retta Dixon Home, which was followed on from Carlin Compound after the war. And I drove past Karu Park, as it's now called, the other day, and was really distressed to see that the old Poinciana trees have all been cut down. I couldn't believe that. They're historical objects, not just objects, they're the kind of signifiers for the people who stayed there. I mean, all that's left on that park now are the concrete bases of the cottages where kids were incarcerated, many of my own family, many Gurindji people who were removed. The town of Darwin carries really strong, even though it's on Larrakia country, and I always acknowledge that and thank the Larrakia for having cared for Gurindji people who were here, my family members included. There's Gurindji spirits that are all through this place. You can, the photo that was just up before then, the black and white one on the bottom right, was included Auntie Daisy, Josie's sisters Roseanne and Esther. I know that Stephen's now fighting with the photograph wanting to go on a loop. Your nieces, your daughters, my beautiful Auntie Nancy, my dad's younger sister, the day before maybe it was the day after we buried Dad's ashes. These two photographs are of wonderful family. When I first went out to talk about what I might do as part of my PhD project, which was able to be linked in with Ijani, the True Stories from Gurindji Country project, and working with Karankani and spending time with Leah, who has the patience of Job with dealing with all my questions, my wonderful cousin brothers, Maury, MP, JP, Leah's brother, John, who helped me walk the Wave Hill walk-off track because I wanted to have an understanding of the actual place. And walking with family was really key to that. My beautiful Auntie Nancy on the site of Carlin Compound, which is such a significant site here in Darwin, surrounded by opulence now, very high-end residential dwellings. It was considered a rubbish dump for human beings when it was established. We were seen as a problem, the people of mixed race. There's much to go on with. The collaborative exhibition couldn't have been realised without the input of so many people. It was done through the University of New South Wales Art and Design, their galleries there, and University of Queensland Art Museum. My dad went to UQ in the 1940s. As a student, he was studying civil engineering, which was extremely unusual at the time. To work with Curran Carney, to work with the Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language, to work with community members out on country, and also displaced community members such as family like Josie and many more around the country, is in an exhibition that's been touring since 2017, and it will have its final it's on at Hervey Bay. I think it's just finishing at Hervey Bay Regional Gallery at the moment in Queensland, and will be going to its final destination in Australia anyway, at the Australian National University where I work, the Drill Hall Gallery, from October to December. So it's had its own journey, taking all these many stories around the country. I might finish there because I'd like to leave space for comments or questions. And I am so grateful to everybody for persevering with putting this on, because there was lots of anxiety, I can tell you, about being able to physically do it, access the technology. And huge thanks to the Power Institute for your wonderful support and patience and enthusiasm for helping realise this. And I love you, Stephen.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for all of the panelists. I was wondering if you wanted to do a Q&A, if that was okay. And so, do we have things that you want to talk amongst yourselves, or I'm trying to look for the questions at the moment.
Oh, have you not received any? We bamboozled everyone.
No, I can't see them.
Have you got a question? Have you got a question?
Well, I just want to, ask about, the importance of, using country in your research, and how, you described it as an autoethnography, and thinking of the ways in which, that knowledge is revealed to you through, the act of walking and reconnecting, because I think we've heard a lot about reconnecting.
Look, I've spoken so much about that, and I've sent some links through. I want to give this space to Leah and Felicity and Josie, but I have put links on there where I've talked at length about the research project. It's been life-changing for me, and I really encourage people to have a look at some of those links if they're interested. But I'd like to throw over to Leah and Josie to talk about being country, what country means for you.
Oh, just if I could just add a few things. Country and connection, and the history has always been oral history for Aboriginal people. We haven't had the written language, and work that Felicity has done, particularly, I would say it's been the most significant development that's ever happened on Gurindji country, because even though we have a history of the freedom fighters that got most of the rights and of Aboriginal people, 66, it then, I reckon, it had a big impact on why we had the 1967 referendum. On the whole, in terms of resources and services, when you look at other Aboriginal communities around Australia and in the Territory, I believe particularly Dagaragu has lost right out. I've seen the most, amazing communities in the Cape York, and we could only wish we could see that work and those sorts of resources and buildings in Dagaragu. Dagaragu is the community where all the strikers went and sat down at Waddy Creek. And the government built Gurindji, and it was a government town to break the strike. And at Dagaragu, because our people were such visionary people, they knew that they had to go and work for the government to get money in to build that new town. But that they always thought that our people would move into those houses, but they didn't. And I just think the oral history has been absolutely is still the most amazing, I guess we could call it a tool, but a practice of Aboriginal people that has helped us find family. And with Leah, in one of those photographs where my children are going back out to the next couple of generations of young people that are going out to bury them. Leah was we gave Leah a trip, a lift back, and my daughters and grandchildren come to know Leah and her knowledge that she gives, and that is that connection again. And that's where they will grow and develop through Leah. Felicity's work and the stories and the oral histories. They had the decency to give me the thumbs up to say one of the oral histories when they talked about the murder is my grandfather murdering an Aboriginal man. And when Leah talks about that picture about the women's pain and story, my grandmother, I never ever met her, of course. My mother never saw her once she was removed at 6 or 7. But she lived in the Aboriginal camp with her husband. But when my grandfather, the white station manager, would come, she had to go up to the big house and he had no say. And my mother's born and my other uncle, Jack Cusack's born. And so they are like they are just amazing sort of links. And then even with Brenda, I go in 1982 to Canberra to work in the ADC, and one of the men, the first men I'll meet is Uncle Joe Croft, is Brenda's dad. And I ring up Mum and I said, oh, I met this man, he's Aboriginal man, and he says, Gurindji, his name's Joe Croft. My mother started crying. Mum had him when Arnie Bess in that, they came to Carlin Compound. Mum remembers him as a baby and followed his story from being not only put in Carlin and then moving right even to when he went to Charters Towers to All Souls. And so it's just amazing how those connections, and no matter how much they've tried to wipe us out, we have survived, as Leah said. And it's that sort of storytelling, and people like Felicity, as I said, I reckon it's been a major piece of work that's happened out there, that you have captured the language in those stories. And we've always had a bit of a richness with linguists that have done that. And that's just a blessing for all of our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Leah, did you also want to add anything?
For me, I would just like to say it's special moment. Like, it was a special moment. It still is, every time I hear like Josie speak here and Auntie and Nangari, and everyone working together to tell that true story, to keep it going, you know. And because, like we say, we can only move forward if we acknowledge our past. It determines who we are then, you know, as human beings, not only as a person, but as a people. And like Josie said, you know, we have even Auntie Brenda, even Ngangari, you know, keeping that language and culture alive and strong for a new generation. It's very important, and for bringing the ones, families that have missed out on that, you know, that are living in the towns, that are living in urban settings, most welcome to come home, you know. And we'll have all these things that we still do these things. We still practice these things. And it's important for us now and for future generation. Like I say, still be a proud Gurindji Malngin. Not proud, whatever tribe, you know, but be proud in who you are always. Because that keeps us going and knowing who we are. Knowing our background, knowing our purpose. Even if we don't know our purpose in life, you know, we don't know what tomorrow brings. But knowing that who you are, there's something, it keeps you strong, keeps you going. And, you know, that family, maintaining their family ties and finding your family too. Because even if you don't find your right family, blood family, but you will still find other families. That's the thing about being Black. There's always family. And we have our Kardia family, you know. And, you know, like being Indigenous, your Kardia's way of thinking is, you know, your family is your immediate kin. Indigenous way of thinking is family is who you share your life with, who you cry with, who you laugh with, who you love with. That's family, you know, that gives you through to the next day. It doesn't matter what color you are, because you, like, my daughter-in-law looks after 2 little white kids, you know, that come over across the road to play with my granddaughters every day in Alice Springs. They're family, you know, they take them at push. That's what family is. Look after one another, be strong, always taking care of one another. Yeah. That's all I like to talk with.
Thank you, Leah. And Felicity, did you want to add any final comments?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say something about, there's been a lot of the theme of what we've talked about is the damage, I guess, that's happened to families and people through removal from country. And Leah and I have been working on a project just recently with some scientists from Caltech in California. So we went over there to see them. They've now been working with us at Gurindji. And the purpose of that project was, we're actually beginning to realise, is actually seeing neurological effects on people who grow up on country, and I guess, you know, by extension, people who've been removed from country. So Gurindji has an incredibly complex system, a directional system, which, you know, comes about from thousands of years of navigating on country, and it's encoded linguistically in amazing ways. And it looks like there's a reflection of that neurologically in the brain, where Gurindji people are able to make use of what are called magnetite crystals to actually sort of align with magnetic compass points. So this is starting to sound a bit kind of sciencey and in the realm of, I guess, Western knowledge systems and all the rest of it. But I think one of the wonderful things that I've enjoyed about working with Leah is bringing together Indigenous knowledge systems and Western science systems and actually contributing to that story. So the fact that Indigenous people probably have grown up on country, have this incredible ability, means that certainly as a non-Indigenous person, I have a deficit, and we're constantly talking about Indigenous deficits and not white fella deficits. And so I think there's some, you know, amazing collaborations that are going on at the moment that really speak to that connection to country and the effects that displacement's really had, you know, across people in the nation.
Can I finish with one last little thing? And thank you for bringing that up, Felicity, because it's an amazing project. I just want to pay tribute to someone that we lost last weekend, a great songman and storyteller. And I would just encourage people to read the links that are in the chat that we put up for more information about Gurindji. But if you want to have an understanding of what First Nations experience is in this country, you can't go past listening to Uncle Archie Roach's Took the Children Away. And that's where I'll finish on today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you very much, Felicity and Leah and Josie. I want to thank you all for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today, and that we are still faced with the consequences and reverberations of colonization, and it's so beautiful to hear the ways in which Gurindji culture, language, art, and relationships and practices are still being held on to, and how hard it is to hold on to culture, and the generosity in which you pass on all of this knowledge. I'm not oblivious to the traumas that many of these histories kind of bring up for you all. And I just want to thank you for your willingness to share with us these histories. And I'm so grateful for the way in which Gurindji activism, advocacy, and reconnection is so strong and so abundant. Culture is, and country is the way in which we can begin to heal and restore ourselves and our communities and our countries. This has taken many months to organise this panel, and so I just want to thank you all for coming together, and for Nick Croggan for his amazing logistical knowledge and skills. And so thank you all for joining us today, listening to this really fantastic and energising discussion. To really hear from the power of Gurindji country and the power of Gurindji people. I also want to mention that we have a lecture tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the Power Institute by Lisa Nakamura, who will be joining us from the University of Michigan. She'll be talking about race, gender, and the internet. We also have a short survey that we invite participants to do. And so if you do have the time, we'd be really grateful here at the Power Institute. So thank you again to this inspiring panel, and thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Mandach.
Mandach.